Hello, friends and enemies, heroes and villains. Welcome to Epic Realms. Today's guest is an award winning author and renowned editor. He's worked on projects for GURPS, Call of Cthulhu, D&D, not to mention his books in Forgotten Realms, Ravenloft, so on and so forth. There's a big long list. Please welcome the one and only James Lowder to Epic Realms. How you doing?
All right. All right. Thank you for having me.
I'm very glad and excited to have you on here. And I was kind of curious. You started writing and editing pretty early in your life, like high school, right? Or was it before
Right.
high school?
Yeah, it was that. Yeah, actually, before high school, I started, you working on drawing and writing my own comic books and working on short stories when I was in middle school,
Okay.
and then worked on the high school newspaper and the yearbook, and went to a summer program at a local college when I was in freshman in high school, and got to work on the yearbook there. Wrote stories for that. Continued that when I went to an undergrad at Marquette. I worked on the literary magazine as a fiction editor and feature editor there. So, yeah, I've been doing this forever.
For a long time. Did you have family influences? Do you have parents or aunts or uncles that were into writing or poetry or
No,
anything like that? Or
no,
were
yeah,
you just like the
com-
unique duck in the family?
complete. Yeah, my dad was a construction worker, and my mom worked in nursing home. So that's I did held both of those jobs when I was in high school. Paid for college wheelbarrowing asphalt with my dad.
Wow.
So in Boston, and no, I'm kind of unusual for my family that way. My older brother was into comics and into reading quite a lot, so he was an influence. But I was fortunate. My parents basically let me pursue the things that I was interested in. And then I had a number of absolutely fantastic teachers and drew a circle of friends, especially by the time I got to high school, who were very supportive. And so we all played D&D together. Several of us read comics and collected comics. One of my friends' parents let us paint his ceiling and walls in his room with all of these comic book characters and everything else. We spent months doing that. So yeah, it was great.
That's awesome. You mentioned your book and, that kind of stuff, newspaper, magazine stuff early on. Were those things in high school and maybe early college? Are those kinds of things that you learned there? Are they things that you still use regularly on this day? And are there anything in particular that like really stands out to you
Oh,
looking
that
back?
yeah, great question. I mean, part of it was I was in situations in my high school. The newspaper had actually folded, and we didn't have it for a couple of years. And then I got a teacher to be the sponsor and uh, helped relaunch the paper after doing a journalism class at that summer program, um, where I had done my first couple of writing assignments there. I think the first thing I published was a review of Star Wars. Uh, the first movie when it first came
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
And then the same thing with that summer program. The second year I attended, we didn't have anybody was they didn't have anybody to do the yearbook, so several of the other students and I got together and we did the hey, let's put on a show, and we went in on weekends and put the thing together. And what I took away from that was that the confidence to be able to take the lead on those kind of projects, that actually people that are motivated and trying to put a good project together can can do remarkable things even without a lot of resources and a lot of experience.
That's awesome. That's a great thing to encourage people, especially kids, students, but also adults, people that are adults that have been doing it for years to go, hey, get that confidence, go out there, you can do it. You can do it. This show
Right. Yeah.
this show.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and that was, and it's the same thing with the mentors as I've gone through the people who were the editors, Marilyn Hendrickson and Pat Moran, who were the editors at the literary magazine at Marquette the first year. Both of them went on to be professionals in publishing. and I learned an incredible amount from them because they had these professional standards and the way they handle things for that magazine, that they were really trying to make the magazine the best it could possibly be. And that carried over by the time I started at Marquette, TSR in the book division. It was still being formed. What the fiction publishing program became was grounded in s- sort of a game company transitioning to becoming a fiction program in
Yeah.
the 80s.
Yeah.
And then around 87, 88, because of the success of Dragonlance, the first six Dragonlance books, and the novels that came after, we transitioned that program into being a really significant fiction publishing operation. And that also meant we were writing our own back cover copy and doing our art orders, and again, that whole let's put on a show kind of approach for a very small staff in the book department.
Yeah. But what big things that department did,
It,
right?
yeah, it's
The impact.
staggering, especially looking back on it, how much the program punched above its weight.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
you know, there was a period around 1990 where uh, TSR, we had like 23 books. That was the total output, which is significant for a staff that's a managing editor and then three full-time editors. Um, the company with those 23 books had more bestsellers at B. Dalton's and Walden Books, which were major chains at the time,
Yeah.
than all of the individual conglomerate houses in New York that were publishing 200 books.
Right.
So the 23 books TSR published had more bestsellers than Ballantine, Random House, Del Rey, all of these giant programs that had hundreds of people working for them, which was crazy,
Yeah,
absolutely crazy.
for sure. Was that kind of your foot in the door after college to the industry? Because you've worked, you've been an author, you've worked on game design, you worked on all kinds of stuff. It
Right.
was TSR kind of your foot in the door, and kind of how did that happen?
Well, it was, though I'd actually sold some material before I worked for TSR. My original plan, I graduated from Marquette. I was going to go to graduate school and get my as I say, my practical plan, haha, was to get a PhD in medieval literature and teach and then write on the side, because since I was a little kid, I wanted to do this sort of writing game design stuff.
Yeah.
And I liked teaching. I didn't like academia so much. So I left grad school and then started looking for something that I wanted to do full time. And I interviewed a couple of times with TSR, didn't get the job, did get a job offer from Gary Gygax at New Infinities to be a hybrid fiction game editor.
Okay.
Uh, and then that didn't work out because New Infinities sort of fell apart, and they came back and offered me a job at TSR because they were looking for somebody specifically who could do sort of that foot in both worlds, the game and the fiction stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd had a few publications before that. Gateways Magazine, I sold a piece on how to design superhero role-playing game settings. I did some film and book reviews for Film Facts Magazine and Midnight Graffiti and things like that. Kind of mid-tier magazines.
Yeah.
Uh, and then I got the job at TSR, and from there it was instantly being thrust within the first year. The first year, I went from being an editorial assistant, Xeroxing manuscripts and doing that kind of stuff, to being in charge of the Avatar project, which was the novels and game related stuff and comics from DC Comics that were all there to explain the different the changes between first and second edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, 0 to 1,000 miles an hour with these incredibly important books for the company in a very short amount of time. And I was and that was another one of those instances where it was partly mentors. Mary Kirchhoff, who was head of the department, did a spectacular job training me as an editor, and made sure I was fully ready to work with those books when they were assigned to me. And being surrounded by the people in the book department and the people in the game division at TSR, there's nothing like it. I mean, well, I guess the analogy I always think of is if you're a music nerd and you think of what the Brill Building was like in the '60s, right? You
Yeah,
know that all of these incredibly talented people all having these offices, and they're all writing what ends up being significant pop songs, all kind of working in parallel, and that's what TSR in the late '80s was like.
that's crazy. How is that for you? You know, you grew up playing D&D with your friends, right?
Right.
D&D and, you know, that kind of stuff. Put yourself back into your shoes at the moment getting to work there during that era. What were you thinking, like, oh my god, I've hit the big leagues,
I
or I'm
did.
so
Yes, that's
excited, or
exact.
this is exactly what I wanted my entire life?
It is, and part of that is, there are. I dedicated my first novel to three of my teachers from high school: Beth Anderson, Lynn Caldwell, and Bob Cole. In part because they pushed me to try to do things like that and gave me the confidence to think I could succeed. And that paid off. But when I got to TSR and I got the opportunity to audition for a novel, because one of the things we did in the department, everybody wanted to write novels because they were so successful.
Yeah,
But we set up a program where if you wanted to write a novel and you hadn't done fiction before, you had to audition for it and audition for it blind. So you were competing against. We opened up the submission process. So we were getting in writers, Elaine Cunningham, Christy Golden, Mary Herbert, are all authors who I uh, brought into the company through the slush submission and the audition process. But anybody in house that wanted to write a novel had to compete with them. And
yeah,
until they so you'd write the proposal and your name would go off it and it would go in to the pool with the other ones that were being reviewed by the editors, and the best ones won out. Um Looking back on it now after 30 years is, what kind of hubris do you have to think that yes, I could write one of these novels, and then have it do well.
yeah.
Um
And then it
so
did, and then it did.
and then it did. Right, exactly. Then, sure. I There were weeks that I sold better than Stephen King and John Grisham. Okay. Which was again the power of the company and the lines, because the novels hit the market at this perfect point. Interested D&D was there, but also the chain stores Walden's and B Dalton's were making those books available to the perfect market, and they loved working with TSR at the time, and we did all kinds of promotions with them to hype the books as well. And it was one of those perfect storm things.
You mentioned people submitting, this is my idea, right?
Yep.
At the time, D&D was putting out Dragonlance, Ravenloft, Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk,
Right.
you know, this huge list of places and worlds. How did they say, okay, well, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do? Or was it just like you pitch whatever you wanted? You want to pitch Ravenloft, you're going to get Ravenloft.
Right. Well, I mean, originally it was like with Avatar, the company had, and this was Shadowdale, Tantris, and Waterdeep, the three novels. Um, the company had come up with a basic, very rough plot for what that was going to do. Four characters, unlikely heroes, the gods, and the tablets of fate, and all of that stuff came from TSR, and they found originally three authors who would go on uh, to do the books later on. And this was one of the developments that we did in the department. We cre- When I was the series developer for Ravenloft and the Forgotten Realms, I created things like the Harper's series, which were intended to be standalone books set within the larger world. They didn't have to connect up. So that gave us the ability then to just have people come in and pitch a good idea. So, and that's where Elaine Cunningham, came from with Erlen. That was a character she wanted to write. She pitched this water deep fantasy mystery uh, with the characters that she created, and then that got added onto the Forgotten Realms. And so it was a hybrid. There were books that the company did want to do, but in the book department, what we were trying to do is then open up the platform so that the individual authors would have more say and more creative control, and the ability for the books to reflect their vision.
Okay. Let's do a little aside here. I mentioned Ravenloft. I mentioned it for a reason.
Right.
You were kind of heading that whole thing up as far as the stories go. You have some amazing books in there. What was it about Ravenloft that drew you in as a player,
Oh,
as an author, as a editor?
right. Well, I had played the original module that Tracy and Laura wrote before I started at TSR. So I was familiar with what Ravenloft was as a player first. And that's true with Dragonlance as well. I had actually played through some of the Dragonlance the DL module series as a player first. I'm very much interested in horror, especially in that the cross genre horror fantasy mix. So Clark Ashton Smith and you know writers such as that,
Yeah,
that those have a lot of appeal to me. So when Ravenloft was pitched to be that the box set, and then we're going to develop the world out, I, I lobbied very hard to be able to work on those, and was fortunate because that was that was sort of the ideal project uh, for my strengths, because I could work with Bruce Nesmith and Andrea Heyday and Bill Connors in the game department, and then help translate that vision into the fiction and things that were coming out, while at the same time I got to create a Dark Lord and do one of the domains in Dark Lords, the Stezin Deplarno thing that I wrote for Dark Lords.
yeah.
And you know, I got to Bruce Nesmith and I did a 2 round Ravenloft tournament for Gen Con in '91, something like that, which was just a blast, right?
Yeah,
And so getting to do those sorts of horror meets fantasy uh, creations was, yeah, that was the best.
that genre, the Ravenloft world, has kind of evolved over time, right? From that, whether it be the novels, whether it be second edition, third edition,
Right,
all the way up to even fifth edition,
right.
and even 3.5. Because Sword and Sorcery came out with their own little Ravenloft stuff.
Oh,
Because
I worked on a bunch of stuff for White Wolf for those too.
what are your
So
thoughts on
I
the evolution of Ravenloft from where it was all the way through, all the way up till today,
um
and where do you think it's going?
well, I mean, it's going wherever the people they bring in to work on it take it. I mean, that's one of the one of the strong suits for these shared worlds, is they actually can and should mutate over time to reflect a modern audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I think um, Ravenloft has done right, is they need to bring in more diverse creators. They need to have the world update so that uh, things that were picked up as unintentionally problematic tropes like the Vistani can be updated.
Yeah,
And the people, as somebody who was in working on the setting from the start, I applaud that. Great. That's a fantastic thing to do. You want to make this world more inviting for more players. Um, the one thing I would love to see more of with and this is any shared world. It's not just D&D, but D&D has faced some challenges with this. Is there are ways in which you can create new material and still respect the creators who worked on the original stuff, and find ways to dovetail the setting.
yeah,
so that it can be both. You don't need to carry through harmful tropes, but it's a good idea to keep creators involved if they want to be involved.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you get, and you see that in for Dragonlance, right? With Margaret and Tracy continuing to be the central voices for Dragonlance, or
Right.
Bob Salvatore having control over Drist as Bob continues to write the Drist novels.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's exactly what you should be doing. And especially I've talked to Bob about this specifically with Drist. I mean, he's had the chance because he's had control of that character relative, not formal legal control, but that Wizards has been smart enough to leave him creative control.
Yeah.
That he's had the chance to explore things and to develop and clarify his vision for that in ways that make it clear all of this carries through, that the drow are different than what
Right.
might have appeared in the original
Yeah.
material.
Have the world evolve, have the characters evolve and
Yeah,
move forward for sure.
right, right.
So going back, you've worked on all kinds of different places, projects. From there, for the next like 10 years, outside of TSR, you worked for a bunch of different companies, did a bunch of different things. Do you want to kind of highlight some of those for us a little bit?
Oh, well, yeah. So, I mean, and this is because TSR was such a great training ground. When I left the company in 94, um, it took me about 6 years, but by the time we hit about 2000, I did some work for White Wolf. I did some work for Steve Jackson. I did some work for, various companies. I started, and this was partly the technological revolution with word processing and some of the other things that you could do, graphic design, typesetting, basically on your own computer. Um, I got to start putting together anthologies for places like Eden Studios when I did the All Flesh Must Be Eaten, the three anthologies for those, which were zombie stories. Which at the time I pitched them to Eden Studios, there were none in the marketplace. I know that's hard to believe. Uh, I was on a panel with Max Brooks once where we were comparing notes about how hard it was because he was selling the zombie survival guide right at the same time I was pitching. No, George Vasilakos over at Eden, you really want to try to do these zombie short stories. But really, there's an audience out there. And so I got to do those and things for Hero Games, and that was a matter of knowing enough to be able to, because of my training, I knew enough to be able to put these anthologies together, could reach out to the fiction market, and especially with what I'd learned about contracts, put these books together in ways that were appealing and got authors involved who wouldn't normally be doing game related fiction, especially when you look at the All Flesh Must Be Eaten uh, books, that there are a lot of horror authors and people who went on to significant careers in horror. Those are among their first sales, but they're creator owned short stories.
Yeah.
So if they had been work for hire, which is the company owns all of the rights and everything else,
Yeah.
that's what the rights deal is for, like, Forgotten Realms and
Hmm.
Ravenloft. Because these vectored in a different direction with the contracts, it gave me the ability to bring in a whole different set of authors than I would have been able to work with. And they were great books, and they got nominated for awards, and they won awards, and magazines that normally would review game related fiction, as or wouldn't review them because they just didn't like it from the start, reviewed those anthologies and were baffled that they were good.
That's
uh,
awesome.
yes, which is fantastic. So doing the 200 best anthologies that I did for Green Ronin, hobby games the 100 best, and family games the 100 best, um, those were significant. Doing a lot of the writing that I've been doing myself, and again, this is Eden Studios, and George Vasilakos doesn't get nearly enough credit for being flexible about this kind of stuff. I mean, the George at Eden Studios published fantastic games, but he was also open to doing those anthologies with flexible contracts. He asked me to do a novella for Pulp Zombies, the All Flesh Must Be Eaten role playing game scenario. So I was supposed to write the 10,000 word intro fiction for that. and it was going to be this spider shadow type character, the corpse, who I came up with, who actually goes back to my high school playing days. I played that character based on Zeb Cook's uh, pulp game that was in Dragon magazine, I think like 68.
That's awesome.
I developed that character, and so this was my chance to write it. But I wanted to keep the rights, and I went to George and said, "Look, I'll do this, and you get the rights to reprint this and whatever you want to reprint it, but I keep the rights so I can continue developing it." And George said yes.
Which is
And
awesome.
since that, which is awesome. And so since that time, I have been able to do all kinds of things connected to that character, and it's developed into, I've done comic books with it. I've done, the Cats of Cthulhu scenario that I just wrote that's coming out in a month or so is connected to that IP and that setting. The Nightmare City Call of Cthulhu scenarios that I've been running at conventions for about the last 5 years uh, tap into those short stories. I've published, I think, 5 or 6 short stories with the character now.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, and it's fantastic. And part of that is understanding the rights and working with publishers who are okay doing that kind of sharing.
Yeah.
So I can do this stuff and develop it for you, and you get to keep your stuff, and I get to keep my stuff and go on and do other things with it. And that's been a, that's been a real joy.
Now it's going to be a challenge. Anybody listening is going to have to like go out and collect every single little instance where that character
Well,
is
yeah, I mean that's
and
even
put them all in a.
there's there are super obscure references because like one of the I did a couple of stories for an indie anthology comic called Mythography, um, with that had the characters that I've been using in these scenarios that I've been running for Nightmare City. And so anybody who ran through those, so that I run them at conventions, would recognize these characters, but they came from this super obscure indie comic book anthology from the 90s.
Then they'll have to go through and put a timeline together and build a whole
Yeah,
website to put.
yes, I have one of those.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've had to as I've been, because the crazy part about the corpse stories is the first story is called, and this was for Pulp Zombies, and it was supposed to be a zombie story related, Pulp Fiction, was The Night Chicago Died. How could I not use that as a title?
Right.
And so it's zombies in 1920s, St. Valentine's Day Massacre kind of thing. And the corpse ends that story badly, um, as you might suspect from a horror adventure story. Um, and I'm really proud of the ending for that. Stuart Wick, of one of the founders of White Wolf, uh, talked to me after he read it and said, "You surprised me. I was totally not expecting that story to end that way," which was a win. When you get somebody who's as experienced a
Right.
storyteller as Stuart, telling you that, yeah, you really surprised me with that. That's really heartening.
So I want to look at some of these things that you've mentioned here, from Cthulhu themed, White Wolf themed stuff, all kinds of zombie things that you've edited, written, Ravenloft. I'm noticing
Yeah, there's a
thematically
there's a trend,
there's a
right?
trend, right?
Um,
Where does your love for horror and zombies and that kind of stuff, where does that originate? Where does that come from?
I that I that's probably fair to say that I got that probably does come from my parents. My parents were watched a lot of horror movies and let me stay up when I was a kid. I've always been a night owl. And let me stay up really late to watch horror movies. And so, Dr. Phibes and the first Kolchak movie. I've been talking to James Aquilone, who's been doing a lot of just great stuff with Kolchak. The first Night Stalker movie, that was on television in like 72, 73. Um, hugely influential on that whole occult detective, uh the crossroads of reason and irrationality, or cosmic horror. That was, I got to write a short story for Shadows Over Baker Street, which again, this is just right exactly where where my interests lie,
Yeah.
which was a licensed story with the Arthur Conan Doyle estate that was a crossover between Sherlock Holmes and the Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah.
And you can't get two more antithetical starting propositions, that
No.
here's somebody who's the entire world can be explained by reason, and the Cthulhu mythos where there are things in the universe that you can't understand, and even worse, you don't even want to try, because that way lies madness.
Yeah.
And so I got to write the story I ended up doing was Dr. Watson's experience when he was a soldier in Afghanistan, and the story is set after in the period after Doyle had killed off Holmes, had him go over the Rickenbach Falls,
Yeah.
and so Watson is looking back on his experience in Afghanistan with these memories that he had suppressed, and now Holmes is dead, and they're coming back up, and he's thinking, oh, I wish he was around to help me explain
Right.
explain this, because I can't, because the two, logic and irrationality, are just at that angle that
Right.
they
And there's been
can't.
a lot of that type of feel theme when it comes to Sherlock Holmes later. I mean, they just a couple of years ago came out with a video game that's a Cthulhu themed Sherlock Holmes
Right.
game where you're
Yeah.
playing Sherlock.
Right.
So that's just a theme that just invites people in, and
It
and people
does,
love
and
to
well,
see.
and especially, yeah. I mean, when I did this for the Del Rey anthology, it was still under, the Holmes was still much more carefully controlled by the Doyle estate. Um, but now that Holmes is largely in the public domain, and that's allowed people to go back in now and completely explore all of those intersections.
Yeah.
And but that's been, I mean, if you go back to Cornell Woolrich, the horror writer, mystery writer who wrote Rear Window and a lot of classic stories that got adapted into radio and film, he was living in this just crazy juxtaposition between hard boiled noir and overt horror. He has a novel called The Night Has a Thousand Eyes, which is a police procedural where the characters may have been fated to die. What do you do with that? Right? So, so here's your, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Nightmare Alley, the which was just remade. The original novel is better than both of the adaptations, the film adaptations. I like the Tyrone Power a little better than the new one. The new one has the better ending, but the original novel is, again, ju- incredible. And that's that juxtaposition of, here's somebody who is faking being a medium,
Right.
and as somebody tells them in the story, you're messing around with God, they're not going to God's not going to like this, and that may be what happens in this.
Yeah.
So you've got that, that uh, supernatural religious element intersecting with what is otherwise just a standard sort of hard boiled, there is no God, there is only us sort of story.
Yeah. For sure. I want to shift gears a little bit uh, from that because I needed to know where that came from, but I also realized we're coming through on time here, and I want to know
Yeah.
you've had a myriad of different things you've done at multiple companies, multiple
Yep.
things, multiple industries, whether it's comic books, novels, board games, RPGs, that kind of stuff. Out of all of the things that you've had to do, all of the different roles and different hats you've had to wear, is there one particular role that you felt the most rewarding personally?
The most rewarding for me is writing. I mean, it's also the hardest out of all of the jobs that I do. Um, Being the writer, keeping the writer hat on and creating
Yeah.
is the hardest for me. And it's gotten harder over time, in part because it's hard to shut off the editorial voice,
Right.
and it's hard to shut off the parts when I work in publishing and I help publishers work with, make products appeal to an audience and help them with marketing and things like that. That's hard to shut off, and if you pay too much attention to that, it can be stifling creatively.
Yeah.
But the writing is definitely the most rewarding, I think, and then that's followed very closely by the anthology work, and then helping writers as an editor clarify their vision, and get their work out in the best possible form. To me, anthologies are like throwing a party, right?
Yeah.
I get to put together a party and invite all of these super interesting people who will then get to show why they're really interesting and why they're talented and why they got invited. And I get to arrange the order in which they do things, and knowing ahead of time what they're going to do, I can juxtapose this person's work with this person's work that may give them extra resonance.
Yeah.
And that's something that I learned as a reader, looking at Ellen Datlow's anthologies, or even the way Harlan Ellison put together the book Deathbird Stories, which is a single author collection, but that's paced. And it has a beginning and a middle and an end, and it works and it builds to a point. And so that's when I work on anthologies, it's different than editing somebody's novels and
Yeah.
stuff. But I'm editing a book for John Scott Tynes with Arc Dream right now, a fiction piece that John is doing, and John's a very talented author. And I just sent him a bunch of notes and got notes back from him where he said, for me, one of the best things that I can hear as an editor, you get what I'm trying to do.
That's awesome. That's awesome for on multiple things. I'm assuming being a writer and an editor, you're able to see things from both points of view. So I mean that helps, right?
Well, it does, but at the same time, you have to know when you've got to switch hats. So, I wrote something and had a friend edit it. I mean, writers need editors.
Yeah.
And that's even me. I'm not my own editor.
Right.
That's a bad idea. And I sent my friend, who is also an author and an editor, and she was in the role of editor for this. And she sent me back comments and said, "By the way, Jim, you'd never describe your main character in this." It's Of course I didn't. I know what they look like, right?
Right.
And that's the part where a good editor, that's their role. Their
Yeah.
role is to look at that and say, I don't think what you're doing here is what you're intending, or this isn't clear, and ask those
Yeah. They
questions.
can step aside and look at it from a different, fresh set of eyes.
They're the pseudo reader, right? I mean,
Right.
they're an intermediary reader, and so they're trying to help you get your story across to what your audience will see.
Yeah. And you did some editing for Chaosium, right?
I did. Well, yeah, I did a number of things for them. I was a consultant for them for several years, helping them settle some old fiction debt and sort out a bunch of contracts. I do a lot of things with creator rights and trying to help other creators as well.
Yeah.
So I'm involved with the Tabletop Game Designers Association, which just got launched. Those things are very important to me. And yeah, so for Chaosium, I did that. I helped them put a couple of books out that were in the pipeline. I helped them work on processes and getting some other things like that settled as well.
I'm sure that was also right in your wheelhouse too, because you were looking at Call of Cthulhu stuff, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, well, I had done. Yeah, it was called. Yeah, I love Call of Cthulhu, and I had done an anthology for the company, Madness on the Orient Express, at one point back in 2015, 2014, 2015. And so, yeah, I've been a fan of of those games since, Greg Stafford and Lynn Willis and Charlie Crank, founded the company.
You you just released a reprint of the 1980s the Cthulhu Mythos books, right?
Well, yeah, oh yeah, I did. It's a cult detective magazine.
Yeah, that's
Again,
it.
it's that
Yeah, yeah,
that Kolchak occult, occult mystery stuff. Yeah, they did a reprint of an Arc Dream, Delta Green story that I wrote, and Arc Dream's another great example. I hold copyright to that story, and it's an IP sharing thing. Those characters are mine. The story is technically mine. I'm borrowing Delta Green. They're borrowing my character, and Occult Detective magazine was doing a Cthulhu Mythos special
Hmm.
where they were reprinting a bunch of Detective Cthulhu Mythos stories, and the opportunity came up to reprint that. And I sent Shane Ivey an email and said, "Hey, can we do this?" And he said, "Of course we could do this," and we did it. And so, so that's something that's just the sort of collaboration that I find rewarding. So, yeah, it's a story set in the 1980s in Milwaukee involving a customs agent who may have supernatural powers, having to deal with the weirdness that is Wisconsin in the 1980s. Which it completely coincides with me coming out from Boston to go to school at Marquette, and I worked for customs for 2 summers. So the
Oh,
descriptions, yeah,
so you get
I
some
did.
insight there.
So yes, the description of the building and the elevators and all of that are in the story are just firsthand experience. So
That's awesome. That's great. Speaking of Cthulhu, we've got the 10th anniversary of Cats of Cthulhu, right? That's how it
right,
is.
yes,
I
Cats
know
of
a handful of
Cthulhu.
people, content creators that have been doing live role plays of that game
Yeah,
lately.
oh, it's
So
and Joel Sparks did an amazing job with that game because he boiled it down to a rules light system. And I wrote, thank you, Joel, for letting me write so long. I wrote way longer than he was looking for the scenarios
give
that
me
I wrote.
5 pages. Here's 100.
Well, it was, yeah, I mean, 3,000 words. Well, I could keep this under 10, you know. I write scenarios, short scenarios like a novelist. Um, and and yeah, it's what his ability to be concise and to boil the game down to just that really tight rule set that just makes it fun to play, what is really appealing. And that's another one where I Joel asked me about writing a scenario for it, and I said, "Hey, can I set it in the theater with this kind of washed up magician that I have in the corpse stories, uh, in Chicago in the 20s, and this is perfect. And here's the plot." But I need to keep my characters in the theater and all that stuff. And Joel said, "Yeah, of course, that's great."
That's awesome.
So I'll be running that at Gamehole a couple of times, later this year, and it'll get published when the 10th anniversary edition comes out later this year as well.
Yeah, because they made. I'm looking at it right now. They had a goal of 25,000 and they hit 75 for the
Yes,
10th
yeah,
anniversary edition, and that is awesome on
yep,
Kickstarter.
and yeah, and what Joel is doing, and the original publications for Cats as well, is just that true indie spirit. And that's one of the things that I love about what's going on in the role playing game market right now.
Yeah,
Is so you've got, D&D, great. I love D&D. I played D&D. I wrote D&D. I great. I D&D needs to succeed to bring people into the market.
right.
But there needs to be games like Cats. There need to be publishers like Ninth Level with Kobolds Ate My Baby, and Women Are Werewolves, and the other, the stuff that Senfun Lim and Banana Chan and Chris Spivey and the other people who are doing these really personal, important visions for what role playing games can be, that broaden the market and advance it as an art form.
Yeah, that's awesome. I completely agree, 110%.
Yep. The room's there for all of it, right?
Right.
That's the part. And that was the thing that actually attracted me to role playing games initially. I played Gamma World once, died horribly by
As you
by
do, as you do.
as you do, eaten by a giant radioactive weasel. And then I played D&D and played a lot of D&D in high school, but we also played Call of Cthulhu and Traveler, and
And I haven't heard the word traveler in a while.
yep,
Nice.
and Traveler's still being done.
Yeah,
Mark Miller's still doing great stuff, and Mongoose is putting out good books. And we played all kinds of different games, including indie stuff and things that were, well, like I said, with the pulp game that was in Dragon that Zeb Cook wrote, that
right,
that's where the corpse came from. Um, there was room for all of that,
right.
and that was the thing that showed Call of Cthulhu and RuneQuest and Villains and Vigilantes and all of these games that had systems that were specifically designed to help you frame the types of stories and the types of genres that you were trying to tell in your role playing. That's really important. One system does not fit everything. So the market now, with all of the diversity, with the different designers doing just these great little rule systems to tell different types of stories,
Yeah.
opens up. You can tell any kind of story you want now.
I just wish I had time to play all of these games, right?
Oh, I know. Same here. Right. Same here. Same here. I've got a shelf of games that I keep buying, and sooner or later I'm going to get to play this.
I keep getting
But
people, have you played this game? No, I haven't. Have you played this game? No, I haven't. I want to
I
play these games. I
but I
want to
want to
play
play
them.
all of them. All right. Exactly. Exactly.
You've also got a book that you are coming out with, an anthology called the Dagon Collection. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in that one. That's Nate Peterson edited that. So
Yeah.
it's a nonfiction collection from the Starry Wisdom Library. And again, this ties to the corpse stuff and Nightmare City. It's a fake auction catalog for what the Federals grabbed from the Dagon cult in the Innsmouth raid
Oh.
at the end of, of so these are all of the books and the artifacts and stuff. And then the feds have released them all now, and this place gets to auction them. And so Nate, and he had done the Starry Wisdom Library, was the first volume in this series. And so Nate came to me and said, "Hey, would you have something to pitch for this?" And I had a book that I had written into the corpse stories, and especially the games that I've been running, the Call of Cthulhu, Nightmare City, and
Yeah.
the WoW Reputation, called The Geometry of Nowhere, which is central to the plots for these scenarios that I've been running. And so I got to write the fake auction catalog history of what the details of this book, or multiple versions of this book, might be. So it's great. It's that Borges sort of, fictionalized
Yeah.
nonfiction.
Well, and on top of
And
that, you could use it for your role playing stuff, right?
I
Like
had been
I need
using,
an item.
yes,
Let's
exactly.
have the whole
Oh yeah,
story be
no,
based
that's right.
on this.
Yes, both the Starry Wisdom Library and the Dagon Collection, if you're running horror role playing games set in, anything past like the 20s, both of those books are fantastic resources, because some of them are write-ups of books that have been mentioned in the mythos over time by Block and all Howard and other writers, and some of them are new creations,
That's
like
awesome.
this one. Um, and
That's
so
amazing.
and it's sort of a Rosetta Stone for my fiction, because I've threw in all kinds of references to all of these creator-owned stories that I've done, where even if it's just name checks or place checks that tie into fantasy stories and all of these other things that I've published over the years.
Yeah. Well, you've done so much stuff. Like we're gonna have you come back down the road because there's so many. We didn't touch on like some of the appearances you've made on like shows and other podcasts, or some of your review writing stuff. You've got the Fantastic Flops book, right?
Right?
Which
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Drive
Chris.
Through
Yeah,
RPG
Chris.
that's coming out.
Right,
Is it
right.
already
Yeah,
out,
Chris.
or is it?
Fantastic Flops is out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is out.
that one's out. Yeah, it's Go Show Press. Chris McLaughlin's done 3 of those books. Everyone's gone to the movies, and their essays, just exploring for Fantastic Flops, movies that did badly, that had no right to do badly. They were good films. You should watch them. And so I got to write. And again, thank you, Chris, because I wrote 3 or 4 times what I should have written for this. But there's a theme, right?
Yeah,
On the Monkeys movie Head, that was co-written by Jack Nicholson and Bob Rafelson and the Monkees, and directed by Bob Rafelson, that torpedoed the Monkees' image, but they were fully in on it. So it's really a film about the industrial entertainment system,
that's
and it's marvelous. So
so guys, go check out that. Go check out all of those things. Everybody listening, go check out all these things we've mentioned. You have a plethora of things. Don't say that you didn't get information on cool products in all sorts of varieties, whether it's novels, freaking RPG games or, just movies in general. You've done everything, James, and it's been amazing having you on here. You've got some upcoming events. You're going to be at Gen Con, right?
I will, and yes, I'll be at Gen Con the full time. I've been to I missed two because of health stuff, but I've been to every Gen Con since the last year it was at UW Parkside in Wisconsin. So that's 80 something. And I've worked every one since 1988. I'm doing some of the 50th anniversary D&D panels that Matt Forbeck set up with Rose Estes and Ed Greenwood and Jeff Grubb and some other folks and doing some other panels there. So I'm looking forward to that. Gen Con's always a blast.
Yeah, love Gen Con. And Gamehole Con, you mentioned it earlier today. You're going to be at Gamehole Con. You're going to be running some games.
Yes, and I'll be running Nightmare City, the Call of Cthulhu game with the corpse stuff. And then if you want to shift gears completely, I'm running the Theater of Tears, Cats of Cthulhu, Cats of Cats of Cthulhu,
Cats of Cthulhu,
Cats of Cthulhu scenario set in partly the same place, just completely different games during the show. Yeah, and Gamehole is in Madison, and is a fantastic show.
Yeah, hopefully I can get over there this year.
Yep.
It's just around the corner. It'll just be
relatively close by, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of right in between the two of us.
Right, exactly. Just meet in the middle.
Yep.
Awesome. People can find you on Facebook at facebook.com/James.Lowder, correct?
Yep.
And you're on.
I'm the one talking about publishing. The James Lowder talking about publishing stuff and gaming stuff a lot. That will be me.
And you're on LinkedIn as well. People that like to be on LinkedIn and catch stuff. I'm actually new to LinkedIn. I just joined it a couple months ago, so I'm just kind of getting in there, getting my feet wet, trying to figure it out. And that's actually how I was able to contact you, because some people. That's the whole reason I signed up, because there were so many people that are on LinkedIn.
It's right. It's
that's the only way I could contact people. I was like, well, I guess I'm signing up because there's amazing people that I want to talk to. And that's what I'm going to have to just do. I'm just going to have to go on in there.
And that's it's good for the professional contact stuff. Eventually I'll get jameslowder.com will be my website once again when I get it back up online.
Revamped.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're going to go to our live stream Q&A here in just a little bit. But before that, for those listening to the podcast, coming up, the lead investigator from Discoveries of the Ghosts of Devil's Perch and Holzer Files and The Curse of Lizzie Borden, Dave Schrader is going to be returning to Epic Realms. He's going to come to us to talk about his new book, his new radio show, and his touring schedule going around to all of these conventions. So that episode is going to be live July 29th, and the podcast available on the 30th. Also, video game designer Renee Giddings is going to be here, Tracy Hickman, Mark Meir, Leanne Merciel. The list goes on and on. So please, please, please join us for all of these future episodes. Make sure to get notified, rate, review, subscribe, follow, all of that stuff. It definitely helps us, and it helps our guests. So, for James Lowder, I am Nick, and I want to say thank you for listening to Epic Realms.